All right.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You are here with Courtside with Lawman.
And Carmen B.
Yes, and we are here to talk about issues that impact the public and the community in terms of criminal law and the criminal justice system.
Yes. And anything that comes up and bubbles up about the criminal justice system. We have a huge, huge criminal justice system, and navigating your way through it is very important. So, tonight, we're going to talk about, didn't we say police misconduct again?
Yes, unfortunately, we wish that we could leave this topic alone, but we can't because the incidents won't stop happening.
Right. They keep on happening. So, we're going to discuss a couple of incidents, I think, tonight, and then anything else anyone would probably want to discuss. So, but
Again,
first, um, I think that,
Again, we invite you to
yes,
call in with your questions. We invite you to put your questions in the chat and we will answer them. Um, this is a unique opportunity that we are giving to the public. Usually, to speak with an attorney and to answer these questions that you have, you're going to have to pay a consultation fee. We are trying to provide this service free. So if you have a relative, a friend, a family member, that has involvement with the criminal justice system and you have a question, please feel free to call us. Now, we will state that any question answered by myself or by lawman does not create an attorney client privilege. This is the courtside show. This is an educational, informational show for the public.
exactly. So, and what we mean definitely by any question is, let's say you have a general question about why something is happening, or a procedural question about what will happen next. If in general, we can always answer those questions because you have over almost 60 years of legal experience in the criminal justice system here
Between the two
before
of
you.
us.
So,
Yes.
but we also want to bring up topics of our own, which is why we would talk about racial profiling sometimes, about officers and how to deal with them. There's a common theme that's been going on lately, and especially in a few stops where officers are basically presuming that something must be wrong simply because of the color of the individual. We've called it racial profiling before, but we know it's a profiling and we know it's because of race. So that's kind of getting old, but yet it's continuing to happen. It seems like, and it's not just one place. The videos we see, the things we watch, they happen all over. It doesn't matter, small town, big town, all over the United States. So we have to talk about those things because it is those things that have led to police shootings, killings, and all kinds of uproar in the community. So we'll probably get started here real soon. And I think, Carm, do you want to just remind people of some of the laws and things like that first that have changed and things people need to be aware of?
Or perhaps we should actually do that at the end,
Okay.
so that we can make sure that the information gets out to more viewers.
Okay.
We would like to remind, and we're going to say this at the beginning and we're going to repeat this at the end, that there is a special recall election that is coming up. I've received my mail in ballot. I
Got
believe
mine.
most people should have received your ballots by now. This is extremely important because it is going to determine whether Governor Newsom stays the governor of California or whether someone else becomes governor.
Right.
And while I know the Democratic position is to vote no um, on the recall, you should decide for yourself how you want to vote. If you support Governor Newsom, you should vote no. But there's an additional um, area to be addressed on your ballot, and that is after you vote no, you can vote for who you would like to be the governor if the Republicans are successful and Newsom, the recall effort works. If you don't and you just vote no, that means the Republicans, if the recall effort works and they get enough votes to vote him out, they're going to choose who is next. So that's why you can't ignore that portion of the ballot. Again, don't vote just based on someone's race. Look at their policies. I know I've been seeing in the news that Mr. Elder, an African American male, is a front runner. You cannot vote for someone just because of their race. You have to look at what are their policies. Are their policies the kind of policies that are in line with your values and your beliefs? Mr. Elder is a conservative, and by that, he is more Republican affiliated, and his policies are those of a Republican. He also, I believe, believes in the minimum wage being zero, meaning that the government should not set any minimum wage and an employer can pay you whatever measly amount they want. I don't That's not a policy that I want. I think we lived at a time when that was the case.
Right.
Or our country, not me personally, but our country lived through a time when that was the case, and employers had full and complete control over their workers. We don't want to be in that situation. We see that happening in other countries that don't have minimum wages and don't have child worker laws, and so you have little kids working for pennies. We don't want to become that country. America's ideals are better than that.
And I think Mr. Elder holds some views regarding women and their place in society that you'll have to take a look at. I won't even try to say them, but you should look and take a look at
Do the
his feelings
research. Do
about
the
that.
research.
Definitely. And it may not be him. I mean, it may be someone else that you want to look at. But Harm's right. Look at what they stand for. Look at what they say they will do. Okay. And not just how they look.
And look at their history. What have they done?
Right. Do they have experience, even in governing things? Because the governing California is a daunting job. And even with experience, people are criticized and feel that they can't do the job. So it's no joke.
No.
So, but the key is get out and vote.
Yes.
Now, what you should do along with that is if you miss this election, you should still go out and register to vote for the next one. There will always be elections coming, and you want to be ready and registered so that you can participate because your participation in society is what's key in a democracy. When we don't participate, then we are letting sort of anyone run our society. So I think, Carm, let's start off. You know, we don't talk about the local courts too much. We haven't mentioned too much of what's happening there. But because of the second wave of COVID, so to speak, um, it's a real standstill right now as to whether to open up the courts downtown or not. Um,
And when we say open up, the courts are actually open. They are doing the court's business, but they are not open to the general public.
right.
So if a person has a court appearance and they are actually on calendar, they are allowed to come in. The family members, friends are not allowed to come in. I think there are a few limited seats that they can apply by email to be able to come in. I believe a few of the departments are still being broadcast on YouTube
Right.
for people to observe. And if you are in the main courthouse in one of those departments or your family member is, you can talk to your attorney about asking whether or not your family can view the proceedings via Zoom.
Right. Or actually be there. Like you said, there might, they can allow two or three people to come in.
Yes.
And they'll just distance themselves, and there's plenty of room for two or three people to come in.
But that has to be worked out in advance.
Right.
If families show up on the day of a hearing, it is highly unlikely that the courts are going to allow them to actually come in.
And you mentioned something about via Zoom or not. A lot of the judges have started coming down into their courtrooms to actually do their business. So at least, they come down into the courtroom. They still are probably behind glass and they have to wear a mask. But those who want to do, I've seen judges who don't want to and they don't wear it. But they are coming down into the courtrooms to do the business. So the key thing is it's still not open to the public, but you can ask to attend. And in terms of doing the business, trials are being scheduled. We're trying to get trials out as fast as possible. Preliminary hearings are still going on. Most of the district attorneys do not appear unless it's a trial. Um, a lot of defense lawyers are in court, but they also can proceed by Zoom too. So if you live stream the courthouse and pick a department or something like that, you may be able to watch some proceedings go on. So let's talk about our first matter, Carm. You want to start in Iowa? Let me have.
We can, but we do have one
Hmm.
comment in the chat. Did you see Alan West's wife got arrested? He has been a big supporter of the police for years. Now he's upset with the police.
Well, I didn't see it happen, but I definitely can understand his experience. And that's the old thing, the turnabout thing, right? Where we can criticize something and have a position and then when something happens to you, now you have a different view of it.
Yes, when you
So
see it, and Alan West, for other viewers who don't know, I believe is a Republican. I believe he's a retired Army officer.
yes,
I think at one point he was considering a run for maybe a governor of Texas, and he is an African American man. So sometimes you will have people who are don't believe these instances that we're talking about, don't believe that they are happening on a regular basis. And it takes something like it happening to one of their own family members for them to realize, oh, wait, this really is a problem.
right. And I mean, you can see it. It's that old thing where someone who may feel very privileged, in some ways, and gets jammed up and stuff, and they're asking, "Oh, not me! This can't happen to me! What are you doing to me?" and stuff like that. And it's funny for a moment, and then it's sad. So
Yes, she was apparently leaving a restaurant and she was stopped by law enforcement and she was arrested for being under the influence. Now, my understanding is that retired officer, um, military officer West wants an apology for the officer, wants the officer to be fired. But where was his indignation when all of these other events have been happening
right,
to African Americans on a regular basis? At
right,
that point, it seemed like he was a supporter of the police. So, where's his support now that it is hit home?
and that kind of leads into that Des Moines, Iowa case that happened because it was based on racial profiling. So the story is that there's two African American boys, and I call them boys, but they're about 20 years old.
They're
Yeah,
young people.
yeah, and they're
Hmm.
stopped. The police stop them. They come up to the car, and the officer immediately begins to ask about whether or not they have drugs and guns, and ask them keep your hands open where I can see them and things like that. The usual things. Nothing is discussed about really why you pulled over. He doesn't even want to write a ticket. He's sort of flashing his light in and asking about whether he sees shake, which would be marijuana, on the floor of the car. And he literally says, "Your friend makes me, the way he is, makes me believe he's got a gun." So something about the way the friend was holding himself made the officer believe he may have had a gun.
Actually, there was nothing about the way he was holding himself that made the officer believe that, but the officers know that that's a very easy excuse to use to try and say, well, I was in fear for my safety.
And prompt you to start arguing. And I think that's what he wanted, was he wanted them to start arguing. Why do you think I got a gun? Why are you stopping me? Why are you doing this to me? But the boys remain calm. The one in the passenger seat says nothing pretty much during the whole time as the driver is answering the questions. And eventually the officer,
Not only does he answer the questions, but he provides what you're required to provide,
yes,
which is his registration, his insurance, and his
ID,
identification.
And
But
the funny thing though is that the cop comes up and it's a rental car. And so he's questioning, this is a rental car. Who rented it? And all this kind of stuff. Well, didn't they give you a fob? How do you start it? And stuff like that. And the guy holds up, well, with the key fob like this, and he grabs the key fob. So he knows that he has now the keys. Now, I thought that was interesting because that literally is a search and a seizure with no cause. They have a rental car.
none whatsoever, because
Right.
it's not the officer's business.
Right.
Who rented the car?
Car's not reported stolen, and that's mentioned. They tell him who rents the car, but he takes the keys. He has the insurance. He has his ID.
But he refuses to leave the side of the car.
Right.
I'm not walking away from this car because and I want you to get out of the car and turn
Right.
away from me
Right.
so that I can detain you.
After all the questioning, and there's nothing at that point. He says, I smell marijuana. He might be having a gun. He's saying
But
all of this
there's
stuff.
no
But there's
marijuana in the
nothing.
vehicle. He makes up the story about he thinks he sees shake.
Right.
And there's nothing that is found in the vehicle whatsoever. The young man even says, you have the paperwork. Please go run my name and do whatever checks you need to do. And his response is, I'm not leaving the side of this vehicle because your friend is making me think that he has a gun. Now, I don't know that the other kid is doing anything other than being
Sitting there.
African American.
Yep. He's just sitting there. Now, and when he says that, that's when he's saying, get out of the car. So the guy says, I got my hands here, officer. You got all my stuff. He doesn't even say why I got to get out of the car. He's just sort of surprised that it got to that level. And the officer's giving him the demands, get out of the car, face the car, don't face me, da-da-da-da. And he grabs him and does the cuff move on him. Cuffs him, brings him back to the patrol vehicle. It's going to put him in. And the guy's saying, officer, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And he says, well, your friend, the way he's sitting, he has a gun. Most people have a gun, stuff like that when they're sitting like that. And he's like, you think he has a gun? Oh, my goodness. And then he's like, get in the car. And he tells him even before, and this is a common line, either get out of the car or you're going to jail. Get in the car, patrol car, or you're going to jail. Now, whether he could take him to jail or not at that point.
Well, they can, let me just say this. They can always take someone to jail because
Right.
they are in a position of power. They can always take someone to jail, but they may not be able to justify that stop.
Exactly.
And again, that is why we tell people, you don't need to do the arguing. That is our job.
Right.
If they do arrest you and that arrest is illegal, that is our job to deal with that.
Right. And
again, what do we ask?
Well,
am I free to go?
That's right.
And if I'm not free to go, I would like my attorney.
And you shut up at that point. There's no reason to say anything else.
And it may seem like we are harping on that particular point because if you watch a number of our videos, you will see that we indicate that time and time again. But because that needs to be the interaction.
Right.
The cop has already made up in his mind what he's going to do.
Right.
And because he has that badge on, he is going to go in his mind above and beyond into making sure that he detains you and he can do whatever search. But we live in the United States of America. We can fight those illegal searches, but we want you to survive those interactions and right. those stops. So our advice is do not engage in the argument with the officer. It right. just gets him escalated.
Right. And it does you no good. You're trying to sell something he's not going to buy, period. Because like Carm said, he's already made up his mind. Now here, he has a woman partner. The partner goes over to the passenger and passenger comes out of the car and she cuffs the passenger and she's talking to the passenger. And the passenger is saying nothing. He literally is saying nothing. He's doing exactly what he should do, is say nothing. But the officer is saying, well, you're not going to run from me, are you? You're not going to cause any problems with me, are you? And they insist that he's sitting in a position to where it looks like he has a gun.
But he's out of the car. She searches
right.
him and he has absolutely
no gun. In fact, They search the vehicle. They find no shake, no smell of marijuana, nothing wrong at all. And so the end of the story is that they sue for racial profiling. And at the end of the story, the mother
And it's really
actually,
for the illegal detention, the
yes,
violation of civil rights.
exactly. And the mother comments that thank God my boy, um, did what they said and stuff, or
And
because
made it home
right,
alive.
made it home alive. And you see, that's what we try to talk about is that the boys were ultra calm. The boys were ultra cool. Now they may have said more than they needed to, but they were ultra cool and they did make it home. And when they did sue the department. And it turns out,
They settled, right?
oh yeah, they settled for $75,000. The lawyer got 25, and the boys got 25 for that
Each,
detention,
25
each
each.
each. But the officer went on and had after that had other complaints and issues regarding stopping African American people. He, in fact, they looked through a lot of his stops, and I think about 70% of his stops were African Americans. And Des Moines, Iowa had a population of 11% African American. So when we talk about racial profiling, what we learned from Ferguson from the very beginning is that officers are intentionally pulling African Americans over for no reason, merely to write a ticket or to do something or to search them at a rate, when we talk about percentages, that is outrageous when it comes to the population of people.
We would again just remind the viewers that if you want to put a question in the chat, we'll respond and answer the question. If you would prefer to call in, we're going to have you call in a different number other than the courtside number. That would be the 916-443-5288 number. If you have a question pertaining to the topics that we are discussing or in regards to just generally criminal law. We do have a comment.
Oh,
Why don't police have a scorecard? A scorecard of some, I think they mean of some sort. Um,
well, a scorecard. Well,
when you say a scorecard, what do you mean? Do you mean where their supervisors are monitoring their interactions and seeing what they are doing?
or because that's what all the racial profiling statistics are brought from. It's just the raw stops themselves. From a stop, you either are going to let a person go or you're going to write a citation or something more and arrest them.
But there is always a record of, there should always be. There may be some officers out there just doing some just ridiculously dirty stuff and stopping people and not even notifying dispatch that they
Right.
are making those stops. But they are supposed to notify dispatch for their own safety
Right.
anytime they are stopping or coming into contact with a citizen, so that dispatch knows exactly where they are and who they are having contact with.
Exactly. And so we don't know whether or not some stops are done without that. But, it's a protocol that all officers should do. Now, they don't obviously say, hey, I'm pulling this person over for no reason right quick.
Yeah, they're never going to tell dispatch that.
Right. All they have to say is, hey, I've got a car, I'm detaining him, boom, boom, and then that's it. So it can happen over and over again, and no one would really understand or see what is going on unless the individuals who are being stopped began to protest. And this is why, if something happens to you like that, it's why you have to make a complaint. It's why you must get online, get a complaint form, and fill it out and turn it in. Because there will be someone looking at those in the end. And when an officer has a whole bunch of complaints starting to line up against them, it takes that one time, like these boys suing, for all of that to start coming out.
To come out. And that's why, again, we will remind you that if you have these interactions or friends and family members have these interactions, it is important to make that complaint.
Yes. And you follow up on it
with the Internal Affairs Office
Exactly.
for that agency.
And you know, some people say, and I get it, well, nothing's going to happen anyway. They're not going to do anything about it. But remember, you're doing this for somebody else. This is almost like wearing a mask in
Yes,
a way.
sometimes it's for you, but
Right.
sometimes it's for that person in the future.
That's
And
right.
it's one way of trying to get these officers who don't belong on the force off the force. We do have a comment from the Brookster, and it indicates that it's also a detention if he took the key fob.
Yeah.
Yes, that is clearly a detention because if you've taken my keys, I can no longer drive away from this
Yeah.
scene.
I do not feel free to go away. So definitely. And I think that was just a trick. That was obviously a trick,
Mhm.
to take his key fob so he couldn't drive away. And asking him, "Ooh, how do you start this car?" And the guy's going, "Well, you just push button, and stuff like that, And he was going, like, "I got to tell you how to start the car." So he felt, and the boys felt, you know, I'll tell you something. Look, as somebody that's happened to, your first emotion is usually anger. You know, it's you're being, I'll use a big word, flabbergasted. You're kind of like, what is happening to me?
But you have to try and keep that that anger, that feeling of anger in check.
Right. And remember the rules. That's all. And you can practice the rules without being stopped. You can imagine yourself driving down the street and imagine that officers are pulling you over.
Or you can role play with friends, which is
Yeah.
what I do with my children who are ages 19 and 23. Is I role play with them. I'm the officer. You're being
Right.
stopped to make sure that they are responding in the appropriate way.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to talk to them and answer all of these questions when they come up and start rapid fire questions on you, accusing you basically of doing something.
We do have another comment that says we need a whole new justice system. And that there is, I don't disagree with that
Yeah.
there can be an overhaul of this justice system. Just because this is how it has been doesn't mean that this is how it has to continue.
That's right. And where do you start with something like that is the real question.
I think to a certain degree, it has started to change in terms of now there are more treatment courts. So we now have mental health court,
Right.
we have drug
Veterans.
court,
Yeah.
we have veterans court. And so those are other types of courts where someone comes in and they're looked at for more than just this is someone that we must punish.
Right.
There's a look at what caused them to be in this situation
Right.
and what can we do, um, for lack of a better term, to heal them
Right.
so that this scenario doesn't happen again.
Right. Because we serve our mentally ill pretty much in the criminal justice system now. And it gets pretty sad.
Yes, well, mental health court is a good thing now, but prior to mental health court,
Hmm.
what we had happen was just people with mental health issues being sentenced to jail and prison
Yeah.
because they're off their medication, so they're acting out. But the system would treat them the same way as it would treat anyone else.
Right.
But now that we have the and they're referred to as the collaborative courts, we are seeing more treatment. And if we can continue in that direction, and even for someone who doesn't fit into any of those categories,
Well, now we have for misdemeanors a judge, and changing in the laws is another way of changing the system. One of the things new is that for misdemeanors, a judge could determine a person gets diversion. Diversion would be a program no more than 2 years old, and it's individual for each person. If a person has a problem in a certain area, well, then, okay, you take some battery treatment classes, you take some other kinds of classes. You go to an alcohol program or something if that's what's causing you to come to the court. But it allows the judge, to overrule the prosecution and divvy that kind of sentence out.
Yes. Now, there has always been, or I don't know about always, but there's been a diversion
Yeah,
program for a very long time, but it was only applied to people who were first time offenders for very, very, very low level
yeah.
misdemeanor crimes.
Like a petty theft or drug possession, pretty much. If you did something else, it's not really a diversion program for you. That would be something that the court would have to just offer.
But now there
But
are
now, yeah,
other crimes are being considered
right.
and can be considered by the court for a diversion program.
The only ones are
Sometimes
domestic violence and sex cases
are
as
not,
misdemeanors.
are
Are not.
not, cannot be considered.
Right. And DUIs, where they're fighting over that all over the state, basically, of whether DUIs can be divertible. So it's something to ask for sure. Now, change in the court system, real quick. Look, outside of those two areas, what you're talking about now would be inside of court or before you get to court. Because even when a cop stops someone, the criminal justice system has started its engine. So, how do you change cops? Now, I believe we've asked them to do right for years and years, and they're not going to change their behavior. So, the behavior change will have to be us and society. And the way we may do that is we got to examine, where do cops come from? Where do we get that from? Where do we get them from? What pool of individuals are becoming police officers? Well, the majority are individuals who just leave the military after probably 2 or 3 years. A lot of them are former soldiers. And what happens when you are a soldier is you are a very disciplined individual. Um, you are also trained in weapons. So this just follows along. You move as a team type of thing. You don't rat on your buddy. You do everything to save your buddy. And that culture just increases when you become a cop. And it enforces it. And that's what we see. And we also see this thing. When you're a soldier and the enemy is there, you don't treat the enemy good. You don't walk up and say, "Hi, enemy, how are you doing?" You have an attitude before it even starts. And what we see now in these stops is officers coming to simple stops with hands on guns
Or guns
or
drawn.
guns drawn. And the attitude, it's not, "Hi, sir," it's, "You have any drugs or guns? You have this, you're on probation, parole." You're getting
So
questioned.
the people that they are supposed to protect and serve, the citizens who, by way of paying their taxes, pay those officers'
Right.
salaries, are being mistreated.
Or
And
and
that is the
yes,
culture that needs to change. And
right,
part of that may be, again, as
yeah,
Lawman said, changing where we are recruiting officers from.
right, or doing something. And I don't know if there's something that can be done in terms of psychological
I don't
testing or training.
Let me just say this, for someone who, if someone is an officer and that person is also a racist, it's the no amount of training is going to change that person from their belief and how they may treat people, but that person should be rooted out from being a law enforcement officer. You don't get to be an officer if you're going to mistreat the citizens that you are sworn to protect.
I think that a lot of them look at people like us and automatically assume we are the enemy. That because of stories told, you got to watch out. You got to do this. Those officers in Des Moines, what was the biggest thing? He is sitting like he's hiding a gun. I mean,
But that's a lie. I
I
mean,
know,
that's just a flat out. How do you sit like you're hiding a gun?
because you're black and you're sitting still and you're not moving. I mean,
Because
how
you're
do you do
trying
it?
to comply. And I don't know if you mentioned when he takes the young man out, he talks to him about, oh, your heart is racing.
Yeah,
Of course, his heart is racing. We're dealing with seeing officers and misconduct on a daily basis. So when there is an interaction, of course, we're afraid. And that brings us now to the incident. And I forget, you can If you remember,
Surround County.
that happened. Actually, I was going to go before that one to the one that one of our viewers sent us. Actually, and you sent it to me as well. So you and the viewer were right in time with that one. Regarding the beating with the flashlight.
Right, exactly.
So the gentleman has been stopped. It's a traffic stop. They've gotten him out of the car. They have him detained. I believe he may be in handcuffs.
Right.
There are a number of officers that are there who are around him. Another officer arrives on the scene, and I believe within 24 seconds, he administers 18 blows to this man about his head, his body, just all over.
Without provocation.
None whatsoever, causing extreme serious injury to him. I think he had to get 18 stitches. I think he had either a broken arm or broken hand. There were just horrendous injuries. And this did not come out. I believe his attorney said he was initially told that the video of the incident did not exist. And so we are now 2 years past that. And I believe he has filed a civil suit against the officer and against the agency. Now the video comes out that shows that the officer showed up and just basically administered a beatdown with his heavy, I believe, police flashlight.
Flashlight.
Causing this severe injury. And he lied about it.
Yes.
I think he listed it just as a citizen encounter.
Yeah, a citizen encounter.
Now, I believe either he has been removed or he has quit that police force, but he needs to be excluded from being on any police force. Right. If you're going to say to me that someone who is convicted of a felony can no longer possess a firearm, then an officer who is convicted, who has committed that kind of misconduct on video should no longer be allowed. Not only should he be prosecuted and go to jail or prison, but he also should be prohibited from being an officer in any agency, and I mean nationwide. Right. He shouldn't be able to then, I'm going to move to Arkansas or I'm going to move to Mississippi and become an officer there. There should be a nationwide registry that keeps these kind of officers out of law enforcement and possibly out of any position that would involve them having contact or control over a member of the public, because they've shown they can't be trusted.
And stay away from weapons. They should probably be precluded from having weapons.
Completely.
Yeah. And so that's one of the things that citizens can do through legislation.
We do have a comment in the chat. Do the police in your area know who you guys are? Has that hurt or helped you guys? As Lawman said, we've been in this game almost combined
60 years.
Yeah, it's not quite 60, but it's getting there. It is getting there. And so I do believe that we are well known throughout the legal community and by officers, because they've had to deal with myself and Mr. Staten cross-examining them on the stand. And we don't let the lies go. That's one thing Lawman and Carmen B do not do.
Right. I mean, we confront we confront the officers, because every case is different, but you fight in every case.
Yes.
You can't let things go. Sometimes, if I know a cop, I had a recent experience where I won a 1538. And this officer,
and a 1538.5 is a suppression motion. It is where the officer has done an illegal detention or an illegal search.
Right.
And we challenged that.
Yes. And the officer and I began to get into a very heated cross-examination, because what you'll find is that officers really challenge us by not answering our questions, and sometimes answering with a question, or being very flippant about it. Yes, and evasive about it, And so I don't let that go. When I see that happening, then I have to stop myself, because, you want to get into a little battle, but I'll come back and I'll just start all over again. And I'll be very clear about what I'm asking of them and making sure that I have a closed-end question. So it's a yes or a no. And what happened in that was me and this officer were practically making faces at each other. I could see him almost growling, and I'm looking back too, like, why are you mad at me? And the judge, in terms of the ruling, mentioned that that was one of the things that he judged about the officer's credibility was him getting into such an argumentative fashion with me, trying to justify that stop. He just wouldn't give in to words I'm showing him he said. And
in his own report.
Yeah. Oh, it's on video. So we're watching him say these things, and I'm asking him, and he's like, "Well, that's not what that means." And then I'm like, "You gotta be kidding me, man!"
Those are the words that came out of your mouth,
right? And so they are very resistant. When they I think have a stereotype of us. That damn criminal defense attorney. Or those criminal defense attorneys are always on my back or something like that. But it doesn't stop me. I mean, you got to do the same thing in every case.
And again, the justice system is supposed to be
That's
about
right.
getting to the truth. And so, officer, if you're lying, we're going to get to the truth of it.
That's right.
There's a comment in the chat. I'll let you handle the Zimbabwe.
Yes.
This one.
Yes. Wait. Oh, the first one.
Yeah.
All right. Hypothetically speaking, could and would urban fraternal and paternal orders, like gangs, church congregations, rites of passage groups, for example, be legally protected as patriotic militia? Interesting. Well, I'll tell you this: church congregations, rites of passage groups and organizations, social groups, things like that, are groups that you can form and have operate in society. Even gangs. It is a First Amendment right to exercise as a gang. Now, the thing that pushes it over an edge is when any group engages in illegal conduct. So these could be, and they are, private organizations or public, and anyone can join who have a link to it. And I think what those organizations can do is, when they are a patriotic militia, well, I think a patriotic militia is a militia that tries to get retribution for citizens, right? And you're trying to promote the rights of citizens, especially citizens who may be members of your group. So, if that's what a patriotic militia is, then it can be.
I think and again, maybe I'll let the viewer speak for himself, but I think the viewer may be stating, can they act as an armed force?
Well, because he does follow up with practice protection of people in the community aligned. The best example I have for that would be the Black Panther Party. Okay, I mean, that actually would be a wonderful example of how a people's group, neighborhood, otherwise, who decided to protect their own citizens against police brutality. And what they were doing was totally legal by arming themselves and attending incidents where police were interacting with citizens. Now, they went a little further and they decided, you know what? Not only are we going to protect our citizens, but we're going to feed our kids. We're going to make sure that, cops are not randomly running through the neighborhood without anyone watching. I think what replaced that, video. We now have video. And almost any citizen has a video camera. And you have a right to film here in California. And I believe we heard a story, Carm, before we came on. We heard a story about, and who's that guy? I forget his name, but he's very popular on the radio. And he had a story of what he called an anti-Karen. And it was a woman who saw something going on with a black man and police. And she literally stopped her car, the cop says in the middle of the road, but she stopped her car, pulled out her camera.
And she asked the young man, did he need help? And he said yes.
Yes. And she began to film.
She got out of her car and began to film. She was actually, I believe, not the driver, because there was someone else who was driving the car. And the officer then told her that he was going to cite her because she had parked illegally.
Right.
And she said, no, I didn't even park. There was someone else that was in the car. We stopped And he tried to say, well, you were impeding traffic. And,
Right.
she said, I wasn't impeding traffic. I'm have it on video, everything that I did. I've instructed the driver to move the car. They've moved the car, but I'm going to videotape what is going on with this young man.
And the officer then said, well, I'm going to cite you for something.
Yes,
and
he
she's
said
like,
he was,
please cite me. Here's this. Come on. What's the citation
Yes.
about?
And he said he was going to cite her for having illegally parked her vehicle.
Right.
And then she handed him her license. Now, I don't think in the video we couldn't see
Yeah.
what her race
Right.
was, but she handed him her ID,
Yes.
and she had an ID that identified, because you can get this on your identification. It identified her as being a veteran.
Right.
And then the officer looked at it and he said, well, because you're a veteran, I'm not going to
Right.
I'm not going to give you a citation.
Which right there, we know the kind of value judgments officers make. Because she's a veteran, he won't cite her.
But now that brings us to another story, and I don't know that
Yeah.
we've discussed this one, but there was a retired military
Oh,
gentleman,
yes.
61 years old.
That's right.
I believe it happened around the 4th of July. His wife, I think, may have called because she was concerned that he was acting a little strange. And I think she may have said that he had his firearm, and he was, I believe, maybe out in front of his home.
Yeah.
And he had gotten into his car. Law enforcement came. They stopped him. They didn't work on de-escalating this situation.
Right.
He wasn't immediately following what they said, but it is believed that he may have been suffering from some sort of PTSD as a result of the fireworks going off, as I believe that he had served in actual war zones.
Yeah. And then what happened?
The officer shot him and killed him.
Yeah.
I think I think they had instructed him to, I think maybe move away from the car. And I think maybe he had opened the car door and went to get back into the car.
Right. Now, getting back into the car.
So military, let me just say this, and I bring this one up, to military service doesn't necessarily save you if you have melanin in your skin.
Correct. And getting back into a car is not necessarily a dangerous move. So that shows a threat to an officer.
But there was another case that they juxtaposed that with a white gentleman who I believe had actually caused physical harm to multiple people, and he was allowed to drive away from a scene and was located at some other location later. But that is because the officers used talking and trying to de-escalate tactics with him, and then again allowed him to drive away.
I've seen that a few times on videos where
We need
motorists have weapons, have guns. And the officers begin to, hey, buddy, just put the gun down. Just do this. They're not even bringing theirs up. They're just talking to the person.
And so those same de-escalation tactics need to occur across the board.
Right.
They can't only be utilized when the person who is being stopped is of the same race as the officer, or really, quite honestly, is a white person.
Yeah. And we want to explain that, but there's really no explanation for that. This is one of those things where your actions speak louder than your words. The hype at these two young boys who had done nothing, showed nothing, and the officers were just, okay, you're smoking marijuana, you got a gun, you got this. The hype on them versus when there might be a motorist with a gun and the officers are like, hey, it's okay. Now let's talk about it. Let's put the gun down, and asking over and over and over. And the person is clearly getting even agitated and more upset. But they don't go to shoot him. I've seen a video. It's old now, but it was very popular. And it goes to the thing of the guy getting back in the car, right?
The one where the guy beat the officer with her own billy club, beat her with her own billy club and drove away.
You mean when the white guy beat both officers with their own billy club, and then got into the police car as the other guy is pulling on the handle and drove away.
And nary a single shot was fired. And he had actually physically assaulted those officers.
As his mother is hollering, saying, "Don't do that, Billy. Don't do that, Billy."
I want to go back to the question posed by Zimbabwe because I think it relates to an article that I read on the Marshall Project, that there is a town in Virginia with a government approved militia. Now, this is a local government that has approved this militia. And there are officials in 2 Virginia counties that have formally recognized private militias whose members are trying to improve public relations because they have this government sanctioned credibility. But the local endorsements have no legal effect, and the state of Virginia actually has strong laws outlawing extremist paramilitary activity. And people who have criticized these militia groups say that they've actually been subjected to threats and harassment because they don't want these armed civilians roaming around their streets and parks.
Right.
Now, the individuals that are in those militias are it's white people. I can't imagine if African American people were to try and form that type of militia. Number one, you're not going to get the city council or any other local government agency to try and to agree to that in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
Right.
That being said, that doesn't mean that we don't, to a certain degree, try to police ourselves. Doesn't necessarily require walking around and carrying a gun, but sometimes you see someone and you know that maybe it just takes you talking to them to try and help them.
Yeah.
And that we definitely can do.
Definitely. And back to changing your community. Does it take the churches? Does it take local, school boards? I mean, not school boards, but local social groups like Boys and Girls Clubs and things like that, to take a step out and care about the entire community and watch out for each other in that community. They always tell you that, bad officers, there's one bad apple, right? That it's just one bad apple and we have to root it out. But it's funny how, if it's just that, then what about the partner of that person? What about the ones who stood around while they beat that guy with the flashlight?
What about all those other officers who didn't stop their buddy and say, hey, we have this. He's detained. That's not necessary, Bob. I don't know what his name was.
Yeah. But it seems that the bad apple, a rotten apple, if you put it in a bag with a bunch of good ones, tomorrow they'll all be bad.
There you have it.
So that kind of, analogy kind of happens. I mean, go back to Rodney King's video, right? I mean, if you look at it today, you got to wonder, okay, which one of you are going to step in and say, hey, cut it out? But no, because they saw that as what should be done. And in fact, the jury in Orange County, saw it as what should be done. So we would love to police our communities the way it should be, but what? It's fine.
Oh, no, I was just saying that we're kind of...
So we should be...
But we should talk about Solano, and then I just want to do some reviews on some of the new laws again, so that we make sure that our viewers are letting their family members, their relatives, their friends who are impacted by these new laws,
definitely
making them aware.
And I can do Solano in a couple of minutes. Something happened in Solano County not too long ago.
Solano County here in California.
Yes, and they were coming to Orangevale, so they're citizens of Orangevale, I believe.
Which is right outside of Sacramento.
So they stopped to change drivers because they had driven from Oakland, I believe, or somewhere. And it was a young female who was driving, and her 2 kids, but 3 kids are in the back. There are 4, 2, and I think a even younger toddler. But they're all in the back seat, and her 61-year-old father is in the passenger seat. So they pull to an area where you can see the cop car has them in their sights. When they pull around and they make a U-turn in order to pull to the side of the road in order to change drivers. And she gets out of the car, but the officers light it up. So by the time she's in the back of the vehicle, she sees the lights, and the female officer is telling her to halt and things like that. And she tells them, hey, we're just trying to change drivers. And they tell her, don't go over there to the other side, halt. Then the male cop comes in the picture and he approaches and he demands that she be detained, the girl. Now, before that, though, they tell her, no, get back in the driver's seat. So she turns around and she's going back to get back in the driver's seat. And that's when the officer says, detain her. Before she can get into the car, the female officer grabs her, puts her up against the car, and she's asking, what's going on? She is literally, well, what happened? We're trying to change drivers. The children are looking through the window and they begin to cuff her. And she is saying, I'm doing nothing wrong. They have me up against the car and I'm doing nothing wrong. Now, it begins to escalate when they cuff her and start to bring her to the patrol car. And that is where there is a fight or a battle that begins. The girl is probably 5'2", 120 pounds, and both officers are on her. And what's startling about the video that I saw that came from the lawyers was that they were making comments during the video. And what you see is, as they're on the girl, she does lose consciousness. And they end up having to throw her in the back seat of the police car. And the sad part is that when help came, ambulance, other officers, you watch the two officers tell the story about what happened. And the lawyer in the video tends to chronicle the lies because they straight up lie about even the detention of what happened. They claim that she became aggressive when she went back to the car and then throwing punches at the female officer trying to get away. And that is not on the video. And then when they ask, EMTs are asking, well, how long did she lose consciousness? One says, oh, about 5 seconds. And the other says, oh, about 20 seconds. And they time it, and it's 1:21 that she had lost consciousness. And that was important for the EMTs to know. They go on and talk about how combative she was and this and that. And you watch later as the old man gets out of the car, old man, 61-year-old father, gets out of the car, and they cuff him and detain him. And he doesn't say anything. He doesn't fight or do anything. And he gets in the back seat of the car and he's just saying, we're trying to change drivers. That's all we're doing. One of the things now, what was their crime? They had 2 license plates on the car that were different. But once you hear the radio person who's responding to the arrest, he tells them, yeah, but both plates belong to that girl. Both plates are legal. The car is legal. It's not stolen or anything. Now, this is, of course, after all of the ruckus. And the problem is the ruckus was not started by the girl or her father, not at all. And the video tells you that. But the officers told a different story that contradicted even the video on their bodies. I say that to go, okay, so you were ready, you're wearing a camera recording, and you intentionally changed the facts of what the camera shows.
Because a lot of times they think, number one, nobody's going to ever see the camera. And a lot of times I think because this has happened in the past, that people are in custody and they just want to get out. And so if they're charged with something, if it's fairly minor, they'll just take it just so that they can get home to their babies, especially a mother.
She was only charged with resisting arrest. And a lot of people don't understand that charge. They say, well, then what were you, what were you being arrested for that caused you to resist?
And it's resisting or obstructing the officer in their duties. But usually what I've seen is when that is the only charge that is there, there's no other crime that is there, there's a problem.
It's a telltale sign because it can be disobeying an officer's orders too. So, let's ultimately, I'll tell you, the bottom line is this. Look, you still have to learn the protocol when you're dealing with officers. The first thing is, am I free to go? And if they say no, then you can put your hands behind your back and you tell them, I want my lawyer.
Yes.
Name, rank, serial number. I want my lawyer.
they're already hyped up on whatever it is they're hyped up on, and it doesn't help the city. They're
Yeah.
looking for a reason.
Right.
They don't have a reason. They're looking for a reason, and try not to act in a way
Right.
that gives them that reason. It's going to result in some inconvenience to you, but we
Right.
would rather you be inconvenienced and alive for your family.
Than to be beaten, hurt. So
Now, that doesn't address the conditions where, like the man who was already handcuffed,
Right.
there was nothing he could have done. That
Right.
officer was just going to issue that beating, and he
Right.
was handcuffed, so there was nothing that he could do. We're not talking about instances like that,
Right.
but we're talking about the initial interaction. Try and control as much of it as you can, and really, the only part you can control is what you are saying and what you are doing.
Exactly.
We want to remind everyone again about some of the new laws that have passed and that are in effect. We want to remind people of the Racial Justice Act of 2020, Assembly Bill 2542. That is potentially allows for resentencing if the person's sentence can show that their sentence is disproportionate to other people convicted of similar crime under similar circumstances. Um,
It also allows you, I think, retribution if a your arrest was based upon race and things like that, racial abuse, things like that. So, if it can be shown.
AB 1869, which again gets rid of a number of the criminal administrative fees and actually writes out off outstanding debt related to them. So I had a client who called me and they owed, I don't know, they owed probably another $800 for one of the sheriff's programs that they had participated in. And they were told no more payments are due. So we want you to check and make sure that you are not paying fees that you should not be paying, or that your friends and family members are not paying fees that they should not be paying. And then we would remind again, as we always do, about AB 1950, which reduces the length of probationary terms. You can get off that grant of probation if it's already been 2 years. And again, we would emphasize the reason that that is important, because it helps you to avoid potentially a future case. If you're not on probation where they can search you, right, it could stop you from picking up or being charged with another case. But if you let that probation, if that probation is still in effect, it does not disappear automatically, right?
Right.
If you haven't received a notice from the court or from the probation department telling you that the probation has been terminated, that probation, if it has not run its term, is still in effect.
Very important one. I mean, 3 years on a felony, 2 years on a misdemeanor. And so what she's saying is a lot of times when you're on probation, there's a search clause that allows the officer to search you anytime, day or night, with or without a warrant. And if you can terminate that probation early after 2 years, you're off of that search clause also for the next 3 years. And you won't find yourself in a situation where you have to say, yes, I'm on probation, and they do search you. And you never know. You get caught up in somebody else's mess somehow. So, any others, Carm?
Yes, 1393, which is amends Penal Code Section 667A, and 1385, which allows judges to strike serious prior conviction enhancements. And those are like the 5 year priors.
Yes.
So you would have someone who's now convicted of a crime, and then they get an additional 5 years added on for some crime that they did 10 or 15 years ago. And judges can now strike those 5 year priors. And I believe it is retroactive, but it only applies if your case is not final,
Right.
meaning your case is still pending appeal. I believe if you are beyond that, that particular section will not assist you. The other thing also, though, if you have family members and people who are in prison, California Department of Corrections has increased the number of credits
Yes.
substantially.
Yes.
So
A
that
good
you should,
example would be if you are a strike candidate, one strike candidate, and you are supposed to do 80% of your sentence, they have reduced that now to 50%.
yes. So those loved ones will be getting home. Please make sure that you are prepared to to be supportive of them, because someone who has spent a substantial amount of time in prison is not just going to have it very easy when they get out. It's going to take them some time to acclimate back into our society and be a productive person again. And we want that.
Yes, we do.
All right, we're going to have to end for tonight. We appreciate all of our viewers who were here spending this hour with us on this Friday.
Yes.
We will be here next Friday, same time, same place. We would love to see you then. And again, tell your friends, family members, they have
Chime
questions
in.
about criminal law. This is the place to be.
Definitely. And stay safe.
Yes.
Don't let anyone tell you to be in danger.
Yes.
Stay safe.